So welcome to a new Paradigm of Education podcast. I am your host, Monique Sayers. We're the co-authors of the recent international best-selling book called A New Paradigm of Education. The world as we know it is changing rapidly, and with that comes the beauty of birthing a new paradigm of education. We all know the old tale of sitting in front of a teacher's desk, feeling bored, overwhelmed, or checked out as the old paradigm of education. I'm still surprised that this still happens today. Yet I know for certain that there are massive changes that are possible within education, and they're already happening now. In this podcast, we will explore practical solutions as well as inner wisdom that will allow us to co-create education together. It's not just about talking to education leaders. That was the old paradigm. It's about bringing in parents, coaches, teachers, educators, thought leaders, businesses with innovative ideas, so we can co-create the space of a new paradigm together. I'm so excited to welcome our guest today. Her name is Joanna, and she is a wife, a stepmother, and a visionary of the Flourishing Introvert. She's been on the TEDx Tackling Extraversion Bias to unlock the potential of introverts. So welcome today, Joanna Rawbone. I'd love just to have you introduce yourself a little to our people that are listening as well. Thank you so much.
Hi, it's a real pleasure to be here. As Monique said, my name's Joanna Rawbone, and I found out I was an introvert in my 30s, but I knew from a very early age that I was different. And that difference showed up in education, both in early years education and through into later education. And as a trainer, coach, facilitator, it's also something that I've noticed with my adult students as well, with my adult delegates. So this is something that's very close to my heart. So it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here today.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us as well. And it's such a powerful and important message that you're sharing with the world around the idea of being an introvert, if you want to give it a label as such. And I think it's going to be really imperative in the world of education, especially with our children as well, to understand what it actually is. I'd love just to hear a little bit about that message that you wanted to share around, if you want to call it introversion, if that's how you call it.
And I think that's such an important place to start, because there are so many myths and misconceptions about introversion. It's changing slightly now, but if you were to just do a web search of the phrase introvert or introversion, you'd come up with all these really disparaging terms like, boring, lonely, egoist, social anxiety, depression, all these negative terms associated with introversion. And yet we don't have to go very far back to find the work of Carl Jung, who really clearly explained the difference between introversion and extroversion. And he said it's down to what charges and drains our mental batteries. So for an introvert, all the research shows that we are already, and I say we because I am an introvert, we are already overstimulated mentally. So additional stimulation of the type that we see in a normal educational setting, in a normal open plan office, in life actually, it tips us very close to overwhelm so much of the time, because we recharge our batteries in quiet ways, not necessarily on our own, but certainly if we're with other people, it's often in that very gentle, slow-paced, just really generative conversations sometimes, or in the case of my husband and I, what we refer to as companionable silence. So we'll go for a walk and maybe won't speak for quite a while. We'll go out for dinner and won't necessarily be talking the whole way through. And it's because actually we don't need that additional stimulation. Now, the opposite is true, of course, of the extroverts. And Jung was very clear. It was introvert, meaning inwardly focused, and extravert, meaning outwardly focused. And extroverts are recharged by social interaction, by active experiences and change. So the very thing that drains the battery of an introvert charges the battery of an extrovert. And that's where the tension lies. because somehow what we've created is a pro-extraversion biased world from education right the way through, we think there's something wrong with the people who are not pushing themselves forward, speaking up, kind of driving things. We think there's something wrong with people who are more reflective. In the educational setting, we think there's something wrong with, the young people who prefer to read and do solo activities rather than run around madly and always get involved in things. So the bias is endemic all around us and is harming so many introverts. And with up to 50% of any population identifying as an introvert, that's a lot of people whose mental health and well-being is being negatively impacted by this bias.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. 50% is a great number of the population, isn't it? And I guess that also stems down into our children, as you were saying, and how they flourish in the classroom is so important. Like, that's my life's mission, is all about the children and how can I serve them in this new paradigm for them to rise up into their greatness. And sometimes for them to allow them to rise up into their greatness is to allow them to be quiet, or not even allow them, just let them to be who they are. So I'd love to know a little bit more about how in the classroom, I mean, I know you're not a teacher, but I know what your principles would definitely translate across into the classroom. Anything that you could share with that, around that?
Yeah, so interestingly, my niece, who is a teacher of the kind of 10, 11-year-old age group, she came to listen when I did my TEDx talk in 2019. And as a result, she went away and implemented in her classroom a quiet table. And this isn't a quiet table that's used to punish kids. This is a quiet table where anyone can go, and they can elect to go and work if they want to work in quieter surroundings. And one of the stories she told me, I think I will remember this till the day I'm gone, actually, because she said that she had a very mild and very kind of mild-natured child in her class, and was really surprised that she had to accompany this child to see the head. And apparently what this child had done, this young girl had done, was stabbed the boy next to her in the back of the hand with a pencil, and had really done quite a lot of damage. And it was so out of character for this young girl. And when they started to explore what had been going on, she eventually said, he just wouldn't shut up. And I thought, there is the mark of a young introvert who needs that quiet time in order to focus and do her best work, who is actually surrounded by this young lad, who is up to no good and kind of chatting all the way through and making comments, making remarks, and she could take it no more. And I think that is such an interesting point, that until we recognize that actually both of those things need to exist and coexist happily in a classroom, but it's not one is right and one is wrong. He needs to chat in order to keep his batteries recharged. She needs to be quiet in order to keep her batteries recharged. So how does the teacher actually facilitate that so that people get what they need? And for me, it's about a mix of reflective and active experiences, so that if they've done something that has been really, really active, now let's get people to reflect and write something about it, so that the introverts get to play to their strengths and capture what they want to notice. So I think there are different ways that teachers can go about this, but I think the fundamental thing is to really stop the introverts feeling that there's something wrong with them, like they're broken or in need of fixing. Because that was certainly something that I felt in that, parents' evenings, it would be, oh, your Joanna, she's so quiet, and, we worry about her. And I can imagine parents who worry that their children aren't bringing home lots of other kids for sleepovers and parties and all that sort of thing. Or even on the drive home to and from school, whatever happens, how often will parents say, well, tell me about your day. How was it? What did you learn? And the extrovert might be very happy kind of chatting about that. And you might just get a grunt from the introvert because they're still processing. They want some quiet time to recharge their battery once school ends. Then they'll probably be in a position to talk about their day. So it's how you ask those questions, and don't get cross with children who don't want to open up straight away. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong. And what it might mean is they just need that processing time. So it's about teachers understanding introversion and extroversion and how it presents in their classroom. And I think it's about parents understanding whether their children are introverts or extroverts, and helping them be the best version of themselves that they can be.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I also can reflect on that in my own practice as a teacher as well. Being in a classroom that it can get incredibly noisy with 30 children all there. And having those children, the loudest children seem to have been getting all the attention. And then the quiet ones in the corner are the ones like, oh, they look so quiet, I'll just leave them. But they're the ones maybe screaming out for help in a different way. So it is very much, I love what you're sharing around having awareness or consciousness, I'll call it, around the needs of all students. And I think that also just leads me into another question, even for myself as an educator, like, how do I know what is an introvert, or what types of introverts are there? Like, how do I look out for that?
It's a great question, because what we know is there are 6 different types of introverts. There's a classic introvert, and a classic introvert is almost the stereotypical introvert. So a classic introvert is somebody who is really resourceful, very happy to work on their own, will probably have a very small circle of friends, will probably only speak when they think they have something of value to add. They're unlikely to be the ones putting their hands up, and they'll often come across as quite serious children. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. And many introverts have a love of reading, a love of listening, a love of learning. And in order to do that, they need relatively a kind of quiet space around them to do that. But then we get into what we now know, the 5 extroverted introvert types. And the extroverted introverts are the ones, and some people might have heard the term ambivert in the past. And technically, an ambivert is someone who is equally charged by being quiet and on their own, and by being out in any kind of busy environment. So there are a few introverts, but mostly what we find is there are either extroverted introverts or introverted extroverts. So the thing that always determines it is, where do you get your energy from? Is it being quiet, or is it being in the busyness? And then the behavior overlays on top of that. So, for instance, we've got a connected introvert who may be somebody with a larger circle around them. So they may have, 15 or so friends at school. So people will say, oh, you're not an introvert. Look at all the friends. So they may be people who are bringing more children home for sleepovers and for the big parties. But when they've had enough, when they're peopled out, they will just disappear. And quite often an introvert will disappear, leaving their guests there wondering, where have they gone? So that and with young children who don't yet know how to articulate that, they're likely to say something like, can everyone go home now, please? And it's just really because what they need is that person, or is their own private space. We've then got the dynamic introvert, and these are introverts who learn more like the extroverts learn. And it's not an absolute, this, but we know that extroverts are more likely to get their sleeves rolled up, get stuck in and give things a go. Whereas introverts tend to be the more reflector, theorist type learners. But a dynamic introvert is one who will give things a go, who will put themselves forward and say, yeah, I'll do that. And again, surprise everyone, because they'll think, well, introverts don't do that. Well, yes, they do. The dynamic introverts do that. Engaging introverts, and in a young person, these are the children who are great at drama club, who are great singers, very quiet normally, but give them a role, give them something that they can actually do on stage that is part of their passion, and they become this different person. And yet when the performance is over, again, they're off to recharge. They're not kind of whooping it up down the corridors, etc. Open introverts are the ones who are more likely to say what's on their mind and tell you how they're thinking and feeling. So a classic introvert is quite contained. You'll be hard pushed to know whether they're having a good day or a bad day. An open introvert, if you ask them, how are you, be prepared, because they'll probably tell you, I'm an introvert. So if somebody asks me, how are you, it won't just be, yeah, I'm fine, thank you. It'll be, yeah, it's an interesting question, because today I notice actually that I'm feeling a bit kind of anxious about something. I wonder what that's about. So, we're more likely to respond in a more extroverted way. And then we have the sociable introvert, and the sociable introvert is somebody who quite happily mixes in a larger group. So they won't necessarily just be one-on-one with their best friend in the playground. They may well muck in and join some of the other bigger groups. But again, they'll reach that point where their battery drains and all of a sudden they'll leave that group. But for the time when their battery is good, they can use that extroverted behavior without it depleting them. And of those 5 extroverted introvert types, you can be a blend. So you might be a social, open, connected introvert, for instance. And then that really confuses people, because everyone will say, oh, you're not an introvert. Look, you do this, this, and this. So there's a lot of awareness that we need to raise here about what is true introversion in terms of getting those needs met for the mental battery, and the behavior that sits on top of that.
That is so powerful. I actually want to already do a replay of my own podcast to re-listen to those points. I hope that landed with everybody here. They're so valid and so powerful to understand and to take in. I was also reflecting on, well, what is my piece and what type of introvert am I? And I was able to connect myself with a couple of those different points you were saying. And as it all comes back to the recharging of the inner world, I totally can relate to that. And it also drew me back to a time in my own childhood and things, which I won't share now because we're going to stay on track of talking about the future of education. But it helped me a lot, just what you shared, and I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people. It made me also think about the parents as well, like the society, like this. We were talking about this a little bit before we started airing, about the society, how it's kind of an extroverted society that we're trying to be fitting into. And what if we don't fit that mold? And the parents that are the extrovert parents, do you have a tip for those type of parents, or people who are not still able to kind of bridge that gap or
Yeah. Again, I think this is such an important point, because the extroverted parents are the ones who are more likely to worry that there is something wrong with their quieter child. And they may think they even, do they need therapy? Do we need some kind of special counselling for the child? And they will often push the child. And you'll hear people say things like, you need to get out of your comfort zone. You need to, you really need to push yourself out there. But actually, from an introvert perspective, what we know is that they grow and develop much better at the outer edge of their comfort zone, not way beyond it. Now, the extroverts are often very happy to kind of, the analogy is the swimming. Do you throw them in the deep end and hope they can swim? Or do you put them in the shallow end with kind of armbands on and see what happens? And typically, the get them in the shallow end with armbands on is a better way to go when we're helping people learn and grow, because an introvert can be, sounds a bit dramatic, but we can get quite startled if someone pushes us way out of our comfort zone. What we tend to do is, first a possible moment, we retreat deep back into the comfort zone, and it takes an awful lot of coaxing to get us out of there. So when I'm working with introverted clients, and I think parents can do this really well with their children, is almost just experiment with imagining the comfort zone as more than a concept as something that's a tangible thing, and maybe using a rug on the floor and saying, okay, if this is your comfort zone, talk about all the things that are inside. What would you put on the rug that are things that are inside your comfort zone, things that you love doing? And now let's talk about the things that are out towards the edge. So it might be just inside your comfort zone. And then what about just outside? And then what about way outside? And then what I will do, this kind of uses the marginal gain technology that David Brailsford used in the 2012 Olympics before that actually with the British cycling team. It's about what are the small things we can do that over time add up and make a big difference. So when we look back, we go, wow, we've come a long way, but none of it felt scary to the point where we didn't want to do it anymore. And we know how important it is for children to have a growth mindset. So don't scare them by forcing them right out there and forcing them back into a fixed mindset, saying, I don't want to do that anymore. Give them those little things that just tease and expand that comfort zone little by little, because that keeps them in that growth mindset. So that for me is one of the really powerful activities where we playfully understand what's in our comfort zone, and there's no judgment about, this is what's true for that particular individual.
That's amazing. I love the idea of being expanded out of the comfort zone and encouraging that within children in a beautiful way, because quite often what I talk about, or what I call the old paradigm of education, is all about almost like anxiety triggers, things that are like competition, the need to perform a certain way within school, the need to follow the rules, the need to all of these kind of molds that society has prescribed. Well, this is what school is and this is how it needs to be. If a child is not fitting into those molds, what is it that we can do for them? And one of my greatest passions, or one of the things I felt when I was downloading a new paradigm of education and some wisdom that came through, was this idea of expanding children from a place of love, almost, I'd like to call it, allowing them to be encouraged to do what they enjoy and do it step by step. I know myself, I went to a selective school and I actually didn't thrive in that school at all, because it was too much for me. I was just too expanded and I just wanted to contract all the time, and I didn't perform because it was just too much for me. So I think it's really important for parents to be able to know and have awareness of what type of child is their child, if you want to give them a classification, and work with that,
And even with or without the labels, and a bit like you, I don't really mind if we don't. I think labels can be helpful for useful categorization.
Yes,
but then we are all so different as introverts that it doesn't matter somehow whether I'm an introvert or not. What I want is the people who are my primary caregivers, and the people around me who are very close, to understand what makes me tick and to understand my needs such that I feel okay with being who I am. Because I think for most introverts that I'm working with, and some of them don't even understand that they're an introvert until their 40s and 50s, and the relief on their face when they say, so there's nothing wrong with me then? No, they've spent decades honestly believing there's something wrong with them, because, as you say, society pushes us to be something we're not, to conform to a stereotype of what is supposedly the extroversion ideal. Who decided that? I have no idea. And so what happens, and what happened to me, is that I spent decades pretending to be more extroverted because that's what life and society demanded, until I reached introvert burnout. And my great hope for us in the future is that we understand this to the point where we don't drive introverts to burnout. We recognize and help them recognize when they're already in overwhelm, so that they can pull themselves back from that position and begin to feel okay again. And that for me is real diversity and equitable inclusion. there are so many organizations that wave the banner about diversity, equity and inclusion, yet they don't look at this aspect of neurodiversity. Therefore, they're ticking boxes rather than really understanding. And the same is true of many schools too.
Wow, I just got goosebumps around that. That you shared. I was about to ask you, what is your vision for a new paradigm? And as you were sharing that, I realized that that's exactly what you were sharing. It's an energy that I'd like to just briefly touch on myself is a new paradigm of education, or a new paradigm of the world that we're going through. We've seen everything changing completely, rapidly, in all systems, in all forms, in all structures, not just even within education. And from this leaves this place of almost allowance. And it's like this kind of quietness or this stillness. And I feel that is the new superpower, if you want to label it as that way. That idea of push is done. It's just the old paradigm. It's not needed anymore. It's not needed in businesses. It's not needed in education. The wisdom actually is able to be coming from inside, and then from that place being able to then activate and take massive change. And I'm really grateful and excited for that shift in consciousness around this new paradigm. Was there any other wisdom you wanted to share with us before we were going to wrap up for today?
There's one other thing that I think parents and children can do together that I think would be enormously helpful, and that's something that I refer to as a needs creed. Because we all have our own needs as opposed to wants. So the needs are the things that, if unmet, we feel less than, we feel, in some way that we're not functioning properly. And I encourage my clients to do this with their family. So it could be a pie chart, and segments on the pie chart just acknowledge the things that everyone needs on a regular basis in order to feel good about themselves. So for me, for instance, it's a couple of hours of alone time every day. And if you think, wow, that's a lot. Yeah, well, I'm of an age where I can do that. I wasn't earlier on in my career, but I am now. It also means that, for me nowadays, a certain amount of hydration is important. The right kind of foods are important. For younger people, for the younger children, it might be a certain amount of quiet playtime is on their list. And then what we can do is, as tempers or tension starts to build in the household, we can all go and look at our needs creed, because often people put them on the fridge or on a cork board or somewhere where everyone can see. And we can do a quick review and ask, which of your needs is not being met right now? So rather than telling people, oh, come on, you need to pull yourself together, or you need to just calm down, or whatever it is, let's go and have a look at the needs chart and say, what is it that's not being met right now? And how can we help you meet that? Because there's a lovely meme I see from time to time in introvert groups where people say, the punishment of my childhood, being sent to my room and not able to talk to anyone. Who thought that was going to be, such a pleasure now, when they thought it was a punishment earlier in life? And it's that kind of thing. So it could well be that actually what we need to do is just give this young child space, let them go to their room, let them read, let them just, walk with the dog, whatever they need to do. And that will help them feel okay, rather than push, as you say, push, or think you need to be more like me in order to be good. So if everyone in the family does their needs chart, and then we can talk about it in a very kind of functional way, a very adult way as well, so that everyone in the family can get their needs met, and we can talk about what's going on when something does seem to go wrong.
I think that's really, really helpful. And I also think it's important that you share that the whole family does that rather than just the child. Because I know many children, especially young children, when I ask them, what do you need or how are you feeling? Sometimes they say, I don't know, because they haven't learned that skill yet of knowing, even though they do know, they just haven't learned how to express it yet. So I think us being able to role model that ourselves will help the children, and also allowing them to maybe draw pictures or use different colors or use different kind of objects to express what they need as well. And if they're still not saying if they're still saying I don't know, I guess we can experiment with what you were talking about earlier. Well, let's try them in a quiet place in the room, or let's try a different activity and see which one of those is resonating. And then if it does, oh, did you like that? Oh, okay, we can put that on your chart. So just trying to make it tangible, like, because I know quite often myself in the classroom, a lot of the time the child might say to me, I don't know. And so you have to kind of go deeper beyond those first words that they share with you. And as they get older, I mean, this is so beautiful. Imagine this new paradigm of children where they're going to learn this, like, at a young age. Imagine like, oh my gosh, imagine how much wisdom they're going to have. Like, they're just going to be these little awakened, amazing children and adults that know everything that they need and want. And then from there, they'll be able to create, you know, their destiny and their purpose without having it all suppressed inside of them or being told to be a certain way. I just love that.
Absolutely. And then, you know, it was someone who actually prompted me to think about that. But then I believe that then as they move through into the world of work, the extroversion bias will cease to have the hold it does now, because there'll be so many younger people who know that actually it doesn't have to be that way, that isn't the right way, that there are alternatives. So yeah, absolutely, that's what I'm doing this work for sure.
Wow, so it's like your mission in life is to be able to retire from your mission. The mission is complete or something. It's like, I don't know.
Exactly.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Wow, it's been amazing to share this time with you, and it's just, I could talk all day about this. So if anybody wanted to reach out to you, how could they reach out, or is there any offerings that you wanted to share that could help people?
Yeah, so if you go to my website, pretty much everything is there, which is flourishingintroverts.com. There's the quiz you can take to find out what kind of introvert you are. There's a downloadable, and also I'll give you a link. I've got just a quick kind of PDF downloadable about how to parent introverted children. So more than happy to share that link with you too.
I'd like that link as well, please.
Yeah,
I'll share it far and wide. That sounds amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for being our guest today. And I'll just do our closing. So it's been a pleasure to have you join us today on A New Paradigm of Education. So if you're wanting to be part of the conversation with us, you can join us in our Facebook group, which is A New Paradigm of Education as well. And we will share all the links and information for you at the bottom here. So thank you so much for your wisdom, Joanna Rawbone, and I will see you in another episode perhaps.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.